Last-minute shakeup at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning ride is okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as simple as 1, 2, 3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
what's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
Well, hello there, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, wellness coach, and well-being expert, Darlene Marshall. And when I plan these episodes, when I sit down and I pull together evidence, I try really hard to not put too much of my own opinion into an episode, especially if it's something that I know that I can be a bit biased about or judgy about. Right? Like the point of the show isn't like Darlene demands you listen to her opinion. It is about you learning. If you're a coach or a fitness professional, a lifestyle professional, it is about you learning things that are going to help other people so that you can be a good guide. And if you're an individual, it's so that you have what you need to make informed decisions. Today is one of those episodes where I'm going to do my best, but you're probably going to hear the times where I'm just like, because I want to empower you with information. But there's also going to be some things that I'm a pretty passion-driven person. There's going to be some things that I am going to spill over into my agita about. And we live in a society that hates fatness and fat people. There are lots of reasons that someone might be fat, but we don't think about it and talk about it like that, right? Like we talk about fatness and fat people like they're failing somehow and it's an individual choice. And really, there are dozens of documented reasons for weight gain. Mental health is a good example. Like being depressed, people typically will gain weight. And depression is one of those things that once you've been depressed, you are more likely to have another episode of depression someday in your lifespan. And the more times you've been depressed, the more likely it is that you will have another one. And every instance of depression, you end up with some weight gain. So is that someone's fault if we consider mental health problems to be an illness? There's plenty of medical problems that can cause weight gain. Trauma has been shown to cause weight gain. And outside of all of those things, there are some people in our society where it's just what their body does and looks like. Their body's just bigger. And it has nothing to do with mental health. It's not a personal failing. They take care of themselves. It's just sometimes the way your body is. But if we are being honest as a society, like fat people are often ridiculed, they are judged, they are told that they're undesirable, we make fun of them. Fat people are even paid less to do the same work statistically than people with what society labels as like a normal weight or a normal BMI. And I don't even like using that language. It's just the language of like the way the world has been shaped. Fat people are more likely to have disordered eating. They're more likely to have mental health problems. And I don't think that that is because they are fat. I think that is because of how we as a society treat them. And both professionally and personally, I have known people who are in large bodies who work very, very, very hard to try to change those bodies. And then their body does not end up the way that they have been told to expect. It will change upon their will. But yet they are labeled as lazy because they are fat. And all of that stuff creates this incredible social pressure to make people want to change their bodies, whether they internally want to or not. And it also creates a social context where people are very susceptible to scams and lies and quick fixes and stupid hacks and supplements and drugs. Like it's not a great context to be making a health decision in. And during the pandemic, it had seemed to me like things might really change. And maybe it was because we were in a context where so many of us were struggling that we were willing and able to listen to one another differently. Or maybe it's just that people were gaining weight and the stress of it all, that we were all feeling kind of squishy and self-conscious. And so we had more grace for it. I don't know. But I knew a very clear memory of the moment where I could feel the tectonic shift begin, that we were about to start to backslide. And there were a bunch of celebrities that were suddenly losing a ton of weight, but this one specific moment, which was when Kim Kardashian lost 16 pounds in 3 weeks in order to fit into a vintage dress that was once Marilyn Monroe's, and she wore it on the red carpet of the Met Gala, and everyone just lost their minds. And there was all of this press about like, she was on this restrictive diet and everything she was doing. And look, I used to work in the gym that Kim Kardashian went to when she lived in Soho. And I can tell you, based off of what I saw in that woman's fitness, the things that I was reading, I call shenanigans on. So I knew something was up. We were about to get some weird tide. And that whole summer, there were all of these online rumors about what celebrities were doing. And we know what it is now. There's a shortage of diabetes medication and who's taking it. And there were these illegal compounding pharmacies. Heard of one out in Staten Island where if you like knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy, they would like mix you up illegal off-label, like not to market injections of weight loss drugs, not approved by the FDA. You had no way to know what was in them. And at the time, an injection was $1,300 for a shot of semaglutide. And I think they were charging like $600 or $500. It was bonkers. And that was when I knew the fashion industry, celebrity culture, social media, we were all about to swing all the way back the other way to like the heroin chic of the 90s, which was the time in my life where I was a teenager. And as a person in a big, round, muscly body, I hated my body because I didn't look like them. And I was like, dang it, here we go. I told you there's going to be moments in this episode where you're going to hear the fire. And that's the fire right there. I have been wanting to do this episode for about a year, but I made myself wait. And I made myself wait because I wanted to have evidence to back up what my intuition told me that summer, that something was coming and that we weren't going to get the whole story and that it was going to be glorified as this like magic solution where suddenly everyone gets to be skinny and beautiful. And spoiler alert, that is not the whole story. So I want to share with you what I have been absorbing over the course of a year in preparation for this episode, because I wanted to give you as close to unbiased as I could get about weight loss drugs. So you're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I am your host, Darlene Marshall, and today we are talking about weight loss drugs, fitness, and wellness. And so beyond the context of just, do I look good in my skinny clothes? What do we want to be thinking about when we think about weight loss drugs? And I want to start by giving you a quick history lesson on weight loss drugs so that you understand my skepticism, that it is not just me being on like a high horse about like, love your body and whatever. Like it's so much richer than just me being a hippie and me wanting you to have self-love. And weight loss drugs, or I should say body manipulation compounds, go back to the ancient Greeks. Like literally for millennia, there have been people selling stuff you would take into your body to try to change the shape of your body. So this idea of body manipulation is definitely not new, right? This is a thing that humans have been up to for a hot minute. Because for whatever reason, when we get into social structures of a certain size, we perpetuate something called the body ideal, right? Which is like, what is the shape that we think, like the perfect woman looks like, or the perfect man or whatever. So in modern times, with the advent of like drugs, we shoot back to the 1940s when doctors start prescribing amphetamines. Amphetamines, if you don't know, are uppers. It's speed. It makes you manic. And the theory was if you could rev up metabolism, then you'd be like burning fat and dropping weight. Amphetamines are highly addictive and they can cause damage to the cardiovascular system, to the metabolism, and to the nervous system. So even back in the 40s, that backfired. 80 years ago, not a great idea. But in the 50s, they just tried different amphetamines, different stimulants that they thought like weren't as addictive. And it essentially, the way that this whole theory works is that if you have a revved up metabolism, you have a greater caloric deficit, right? Yeah, those ones were still addictive too, and they caused problems down the line in your lifespan. So by the 70s, there's even more stimulants being put on the market as people are like, okay, this theory around amphetamines, let's just get a stimulant out there until we get one that like works without hurting people. Yeah, the ones from the 70s cause something called pulmonary hypertension, which is essentially increasing of the blood pressure around your lungs until you can't breathe and it damages your heart. So that wasn't so great. So then they're like, okay, maybe this whole like stimulants thing is a bad idea. Let's switch tactics. And so then they started creating a whole new class of weight loss drugs that focused on the nervous system, right? If we could mess with the nervous system, maybe that would do it. So in the 80s, there was an appetite suppressant nasal spray called PPA. That one caused hemorrhagic stroke, right? Like you're just using a nose spray because you want an appetite suppressant and boop, a stroke. Guess you don't get to wear your skinny dress now. In the 90s, you might have heard of fen-phen. So that was a combination of fenfluramine with phentermine. I'm going to butcher all these drug names. You're welcome. You might remember this if you are of a certain age. I am of a certain age. Fen-phen caused vascular heart disease. Apparently, people were taking these pills. Not apparently, this happened. People would take fen-phen because it was the blockbuster weight loss drug of the 90s. And then they were having heart attacks. Yeah, cool. 97, we had Meridia. I remember watching Meridia ads in high school. Those ones caused heart attacks and strokes. Yeah, so it turns out that if you start messing with the nervous system in order to cause weight loss, you cause heart attacks and strokes. And then in 2007, I remember this ad too. I remember Ally. They had purple in their logo. Ally hit the streets. That the technical name for that drug is Orlistat, and that drug, because this was in like the 2000s, that was still in the time where like, ooh, fat is bad. Fat causes body fat, so don't have nutritional fat. Well, Ally worked by stopping the body from absorbing the fats that a person was eating. But here's the thing about that theory is if you stop the intestines from absorbing fats, there's still fats in the gut and they have to go somewhere. So people who would take Ally to lose weight would then have oils coming out of their butts. And that came to be known as the Ally oops, because you would feel that you needed to pass gas and instead you would have an accident. So that drug wasn't very popular after a little while. Yeah, so forgive me if I'm a little bit skeptical about like this next wave of chemical substances we're going to use to manipulate our body weight. I'm not a big fan of being a human crash test dummy personally. So GLP hit the market. I wanted to wait. I wanted to see what was going to happen with this whole mess. And yeah, let's talk about some things that happened. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. We are talking about weight loss drugs, how they relate to fitness and wellness, and what I think that you, dear listener, should know about these as you're making your own life decisions. And to be very clear, I'm not here to judge anyone's life decisions. It's about you having all the information to make the right choices for you. I don't suggest that you take Ally, for example. So let's start with a little bit of lingo, so we're on the same page in the vocab sense. GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide number 1. And glucagon-like peptide is a hormone produced in your body. So we all have this anyway. It's a hormone produced in the gut whose job it is to regulate blood sugar, but it also activates neurons that those neurons then cause weight loss. And there's some evidence that it reduces inflammation. There's some evidence that it has other things that it might be doing. There's more than one kind of GLP-1 antagonist, which is the drug class, right? So you've got GLP-1 that your body makes itself, and then you've got the class of drugs. So when we say GLP-1, we're talking about a whole bunch of different drugs, and they mimic that hormone. I am giving you the very simple version. This is like the crust, not the deep dive, so that you can kind of see the shape of how these things work. So when you hear, and I've heard it pronounced 15 different ways, so I honestly don't know how to say it for the sake of the show, but semaglutide, that is a GLP-1 medication. So semaglutide, that one is specifically Wegovy and Ozempic. So when you hear Wegovy and Ozempic, those are the brand names for semaglutide, the compound. Not all GLP-1s out on the market are semaglutide. There is, again, apologies to drug manufacturers because I'm butchering these, tirzepatide and liraglutide. So tirzepatide, I'm going to spell it Tirzepatide. I want somebody to send me a voice memo of how to say this properly. Tirzepatide, liraglutide, and semaglutide. Those are the 3 that are approved by the FDA specifically for weight loss. But there are more than 10 GLP-1 medications that are approved for diabetes treatment. And so when you hear somebody say that they're using a drug by a compounding pharmacy, that means that there is a pharmacy that specially mixes up drugs to order. And typically those mixes are not covered by insurance, right? I might be able to take one of these other GLP-1s if I have diabetes and I'm not responding to something like semaglutide. But the people who are compounding them to mix them in their own, special blend or whatever, and using them with private pay for weight loss, that's not FDA approved. But that's what that specialty pharmacy is doing. It's taking all these different GLP-1s and like making a mixtape that you then jam in your body. But that's not evidence-based. Like, you don't know what's going on, right? We're just looking at what your body responds to. So for the sake of this episode, I'm going to refer to these drugs as GLP-1s or weight loss drugs. So that's our vocab. These drugs work by mimicking your naturally occurring, what we would call endogenous GLP-1. And that drug then makes you feel full. It regulates the blood sugar by increasing something called insulin sensitivity. Now, this is really important. This is how we stumbled on this. Insulin sensitivity is your body's own sensitivity to its own insulin. So when your pancreas pumps out insulin, do your muscles soak up blood sugar? Is it able to use the insulin provided? GLP-1s increase insulin sensitivity, which is why we were giving it to diabetics. And then pharmaceutical company reps were like, hey, those diabetics taking those GLP-1s, they're losing a bunch of weight too. Yahtzee, you can make a ton of money selling weight loss drugs. Let's take this diabetes medication and cross over the line. And that's how we got this whole wave of weight loss drugs. It started out as a diabetes medication. And so in theory, this all sounds like perfectly reasonable, right? People highly value weight loss as a society. Early 20th century, we had uppers. Those didn't work out so great. The ones that worked on the nervous system, that caused strokes. That's not so great. Then you had ally making you fart and having an accident. That obviously is not so great. None of that was happening with GLP-1s. It mimicked this thing your body was doing anyway. What could go wrong? Awesome. The thing about these things is there's always a but. So let me give you the but. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. We're talking about weight loss drugs, fitness, and wellness. And here we go. About a year ago, I started to see the butt coming along. And I remember very clearly this one too. Someone who follows me on socials, I don't remember who, sorry to whoever did it, sent me a video of a big deal influencer online bragging about they'd lost like 50 or 60 pounds. And if you see their before and after pictures, they were not like what we would think of as like an obese person at the start. They just weren't as lean as they wanted to be. And so this person had posted a video talking about being on, I always get them backwards, but Wegovy is the weight loss drug. And this person was talking about how much weight they had lost, their body fat percentage before they lost the weight, and their body fat percentage after they lost the weight. And I had this like, wait a second moment. And I wrote the numbers down as they were describing them. And then I ran the math. I was like, here's your problem, but this is an anecdote. So I've got to wait for science to catch up. And here's your problem, my friends. When you lose weight, you don't just get to lose body fat. Like you don't get to just choose like, okay, I'm going to drop scale pounds and it's just going to be body fat. A chunk of what you lose is lean mass, and lean mass is the muscle, the bone, the organ tissue that helps your body to do all the body things for you to stay alive, right? Like you need a body in order to exist in material reality. That body needs a certain amount of mass and function. And lean mass is good for you. So losing muscle tissue will slow down your metabolism. Losing bone tissue makes your bones like literally weaker. And losing those two things in combination makes you less strong. It makes you less capable. It makes you less resilient, like physically your fortitude in the world. And then your organs, like, I don't even know how to describe this. Like losing organ tissue means they can't do their jobs. Like you want your organs to be of appropriate functional size. Most people looking to lose weight want to lose fat. And in conventional weight management approaches, conventional being like, what does the fitness industry and the medical establishment do when they're like, that person's really got to lose weight, is the caloric restriction. Essentially, you want more calories burned than more calories going into the body. And if you want my whole diatribe about all of that, I did an entire episode titled Healthy Weight Loss earlier this year. In there, I explain like all of the ins and outs and why it doesn't normally work for people and what do you want to consider and why and blah, 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 blah. You can go listen to that episode. While doing conventional caloric restriction to lose weight, you can exercise to try and preserve muscle mass and bone density. You can resistance train specifically, but you're still going to lose some anyway. And if you think about it, the entire art that is bodybuilding is the management of keeping muscle mass on while bringing body fat down. And if you know anything about bodybuilding, you know they go through these long bulk phases where they pick up really heavy stuff and they eat a ton of food and they put on a ton of fat when that happens. And they just try to be like as much new muscle as possible. And then they try to keep that muscle on to get the body fat off. That is a whole other rabbit hole to go down. But the point being that it is so difficult and specific that like an entire sport is based on just this thing. And I saw a great tweet the other day that was like, if weight loss drugs were so great, bodybuilders would be using them. And I was like, yeah, that is an exceptionally good point. Anyway, so in conventional caloric restriction, it is about 20% of the total lean mass lost. In conventional caloric restriction, I'm having technology issues. That's what's happening right now. In conventional caloric restriction, about 20% of weight loss is typically lean mass. And the faster you lose the weight, the greater the percentage of what's coming off that's going to be lean mass. And that's why like yo-yo dieting and crash diets are so bad. You lose greater and greater percentages of lean mass. And then as soon as you stop the diet, because you have less muscle and metabolic activity, your weight shoots back up and you end up heavier than when you started. Like that's the problem with yo-yo dieting, is the crash and then the bounce, because your metabolism is slower. 20% of lean mass, 20% of total weight loss in caloric restriction diets is lean mass. Got me? Cool. With GLP-1s, depending on what source you look at, they average 30 to 45% of the weight loss is lean mass. And different studies show different amounts. There is one study that I read from over the summer where they estimate, because that group lost weight particularly fast, that they had 60% of their weight loss was lean mass. So depending on whose studies you look at, it's either twice as much, the percentage of lean mass, or maybe even 3 times. So I'm going to walk you through some math here so that you can understand the impact. It's hard to do math on podcasts, but I want you to hear it and just soak it up. And I'll also throw this caveat. Some researchers say, or some advocates of these drugs say, it's because it's also water, right? You're losing fat, and some of that fat is going to be carrying water, and water is counted as lean mass. That ain't it. And I'll tell you why as we go through the evidence. I think that is nonsense. It can't be all water. It can't be. That's not how this is working. And I'm going to tell you why when we get there, but also consider that a lot of people, when they go on calorically restrictive diets, they start eating lean meat, they start eating fruits and vegetables, their inflammatory markers go down, and they lose a bunch of water weight. So that's already baked into the 20% when we're talking about caloric restriction weight loss. So even if it is true, like, it's not different than caloric restriction. But anyway, okay. Let's talk about numbers. I'm giving you big round numbers so you can hear it, but ride with me. Let's say that you are a 250-pound person with 35% body fat. So 35% of 250 is 87 pounds. Okay, so 87 pounds of your 250 pounds is fat. Conventional weight loss method, you get down to 200 pounds. It's a nice round 50-pound number, right? 50 pounds of weight loss. And then if of that 50 pounds, 20% of it is lean mass lost, that means that 40 pounds down of fat, 10 pounds down of lean mass. Okay, hopefully you're with me so far. If I use a GLP-1 and 40% instead of 20 of my weight lost is lean, because that's the middle of the reported studies range, right? 30 to 60%, I went with 40. That means of the 50 pounds that person lost, they lost 20 pounds of lean mass, right? It's twice as much. So if at the start of this 250-pound person was 163 lean mass pounds in the beginning, conventional weight loss, they go down to 153. GLP-1s, they go to 143. Now, that might not sound like a big deal to you, but if you've ever tried to put on muscle, 10 pounds of muscle is like a lot of work to gain. Like, it's really difficult. It's like months and months and months of lifting to put on 10 pounds of muscle. It's a lot to lose. And you might wonder, like, well, what is the repercussion of that? Lean mass is what gives the body strength and resilience and fortitude. And it is also the basis of your metabolism, right? The energy that you expend on a given day. So lean mass isn't just muscle, it's bone density. It's what keeps bones from snapping. It what keeps organs functioning. So what happens if this example is a woman in her 50s that was 250 pounds, 35% body fat, she loses this weight, and I'm being generous with those numbers, right? Like, I'm just giving you spitball numbers that are easy to understand. A woman in her 50s that's 250 pounds is probably not 35%. Like, she's probably not starting at that high of a lean mass to begin with. But anyway, what happens when she gets on the other side of menopause? Because that's the point at which most women begin to experience osteoporosis. So if you've got a woman in her 50s dropping this kind of weight on her weight loss drug, and she's probably not at her goal at 200 pounds, right? She's probably going to keep going. What happens when she starts snapping a hip because of her osteoporosis? And I've been saying this for a year. I fully anticipate that we are going to see an epidemic of bone fractures because of GLP-1, lean mass density loss. And I am a big believer that we are all on our own journey, and you need to be the expert on you and what is right for you. The side effects that we are most commonly hearing about are nausea, vomiting, digestive cramping, low energy, loss of appetite. Some of that low energy is coming from not getting enough calories to run your body well. And then your body is going to turn to the resources it has internally and essentially like metabolically choose between keeping you functioning enough to stay alive and longevity. And that's where the body starts ripping up the calcium in your bones and the amino acids in your muscles. And that's when you start losing lean mass. It's called catabolize, to keep you alive. And we don't yet know the long-term effects of that, but we're starting to see it. And I'm going to talk about that next. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. We're talking about weight loss drugs. And now we're going to get to the fitness and wellness part. Every fitness professional worth their weight in kettlebells knows what happens next. You know what happens when a client severely calorically restricts, they have a crash diet, they drop a ton of weight. Every person that over restricts, eventually the weight pours back on. The rubber band that has been overstretched will snap, and then it snaps back into your hand. So what happens with GLP-1s? Well, it takes over a year for people with clinical high obesity to lose weight to what is labeled as a medically healthy level using GLP-1s, right? So you spend over a year, over $1,000 a month out of pocket because health insurance isn't covering it unless you're diabetic. And when they go back off of it, consider that these have only been out for a few years. So we don't have a ton of data. But what we know is that people who lose a clinically significant amount of weight at 12 months off the drug, they have regained 2/3 at least. And, it's not everybody. We don't know why some people don't. My guess is that those are the people who didn't lose as much lean mass for some reason, and maybe we'll get enough nuance to know why. But it put the weight back on, right? 12-month time horizon, the average right now is about 2/3 of weight regain. It is hard to find data longer than that because, one, the companies are not incentivized to track people over that time, right? Like why track it longer? It's expensive to follow up with cohort studies month after month, year after year. And it hasn't been long enough for us to have a lot of data for people who took it for a year and they're 2 years out, they're 3 years out. The other thing is it makes you really sick to take it. And a lot of people pay for it and then they stop using it because they feel sick all the time. But anyway, that's how I know that it's not just water being stored in fat tissue that they're slapping like, oh, that's why it's 40%. It's because the weight comes back on. And if it was just water or inflammation, it wouldn't be this steep backslide. It wouldn't work that way because you don't have as much adipose tissue. And they're saying that that's what's causing the fat tissue is what's causing the water retention. So when we think about it from this fitness and wellness perspective, we got to think about the whole person health, right? The whole person well-being. We don't only want to be considering weight as a singular variable, and we also don't want to demonize someone who does want to lose weight. And I don't. If you are an individual who the stress and the negativity, or you just don't feel right in your body and you decide to change it, I'm not vilifying you at all. What I'm saying is that us as a society, we shouldn't be judging you regardless of what choice you make. And you need all of the information to make a good choice. And right now, because pharmaceutical companies are so incentivized to try to sell their blockbuster drug, like Novo Nordisk, the maker of Wegovy and Ozempic, they are making money hand over fist on this drug. Like their revenue last year became bigger than some countries' whole budgets. It is wild when you look at it. But as fitness professionals, as wellness professionals, as lifestyle professionals, as individuals, we want to understand what is going to make this successful. If someone does decide to use these compounds, or it is medically the best choice for them, right? There are some people who are like, they are suffering and they need help getting the pump primed. The best thing that I can recommend for anyone taking GLP-1s, lift heavy, really, really, really heavy, pick up heavy stuff, get a trainer, learn how to put muscle on safely. That will help you to maintain as much lean mass as possible while you are on the drug. And the moment that you stop, and specifically like lift for strength. I'm not talking about lifting for mass. I'm talking about lifting for strength because you want to keep bone density. I cannot stress it enough. And then the moment that you stop the drug, lift to add muscle. And a good trainer is going to know the difference in the program. A good trainer is going to have a strength protocol and a hypertrophy protocol. Those are not the same protocol. The moment that you stop taking the drug, put muscle on, eat protein like it is your job, and an absolute ton of fiber, because we don't know yet what this is doing to the gut microbiome. That's another fun one I'm waiting to find out. We don't know yet. This is mimicking a hormone that your gut makes on its own, injected. We don't know. And if people are nauseous and vomiting and having diarrhea, that's going to affect the gut microbiome. Something else is going on there. So when you come off of it, ton of fiber to help restore the balance to your gut, which is going to be kind of wrecked if you've been having diarrhea and vomiting for a year. So one of the things that's been super interesting to me along those lines is that as this data is trickling out, right, and there are people whose job it is, when we talk about brands and food manufacturers, it's their job to pay attention to these kinds of trends. I think it's been very interesting to see the marketing of mass-produced foods to people using GLP1s, where they are adding additional protein into processed foods, ultra-processed foods, so that they can sell them directly to people on weight loss drugs. To me, that is trying to solve one problem by selling you another set of problems. And if you wonder what I mean by that, go back and listen to the ultra processed foods episodes from earlier this year. I'm going to wrap up with a little bit of an anecdote here about my own family. My own family has had their doctors aggressively push them on them about a year ago. And it kind of happened all at once. All these different people in my family all of a sudden were coming to me and saying like, hey, my doctor wants me to go on this weight loss drug. Should I do it? And I'm the person in the family that people come and ask these to the point that I started to wonder, like, is there some kind of physician kickback program? Like, is that going to come out in a couple of years? That'll be interesting to see as well. It was pressure, but I know them. And I already had the suspicion in my mind of like, wait a minute, this is very rapid weight loss. And I know what that does to the body. And this doesn't sound right. And I knew that for who they are and their lifestyle and what's going on for them in their lives, that they weren't going to be able to lift heavy and maintain their lean mass. And everyone I'm talking about is above retirement age. The thing about people in retirement age is that over the age of 70, longevity improves with higher weight. It's actually people who are at what we consider to be baseline or below weight that have worse longevity outcomes, because people who are slightly heavier are less likely to fall and break a bone on average. And if they do get sick and they end up bedridden, they have more weight to give before they have a problem. So as we're out here pushing these drugs as if they are a remarkable blanket solution for everyone, there are populations in our society that they are to their detriment, even if there aren't other complications. But we're not thinking about that with nuance. We're just pushing and pushing. So I told them, hell no, don't do it. And I'm glad to say they didn't. And I'm really glad that they didn't, because I think that this lean mass loss would have been a huge problem to them in the long run. And again, I want to say that there are some people out there that it's going to be to their betterment, that it is going to help them. And one of the ways that we've seen them helping is people who previously have felt like fitness was not accessible to them. Exercise, going to the gym, they couldn't do it, or they felt like they weren't welcome. And what we're seeing is that population of people who have that initial weight loss using the drug, feeling empowered to be more active, to go to the gym, to learn how to exercise, because before it felt like too difficult and too much of a leap. And now they're also getting their health practitioners telling them you need to go to the gym and start lifting weights. So we as fitness professionals need to be ready to open our arms and our doors, to welcome them in, to not have them feel ashamed that they needed the drug's help, and to be ready to help them, like I said, build a ton of strength while they are on the drug in order to maintain bone density. And then the moment they are off the drug, focus on building muscle mass to regain what they have lost or never had in the first place, and reestablish equilibrium and well-being. That's my 2 cents. Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts, your questions, your feedback, your ideas. This is not going to be the last time we talk about this, I promise you. You can email me. It's info@darlene.coach. My Instagram is also darlene.coach. You can find me on LinkedIn. And if you're a fan of the show, I hope that you've already subscribed. But if you haven't, please go ahead and do it. Thank you to everyone who has written us a review. If you haven't done that yet, do that too. Share about the show, give us a tag, take good care of yourselves, and be well.